Ladies and gentlemen, dear Mrs. Papangeli, dear colleagues and friends, it is a great pleasure to welcome you here tonight for the presentation of the publication Fields, Sherds and Scholars, Recording and Interpreting Ceramics that appeared in December 2023 at Sidestone Press Publishers. Organizing and hosting book presentations, such as this one, is one of our relatively new activities. And I would like to thank our NIA librarian, Sotiria Nicolou, for taking the initiative of adding this kind of events to the activity program of our institute. Especially since tonight, this provides us with the opportunity to combine many pleasant things in one single occasion. Firstly, it allows us to bless our own beard a bit, as the verbatim English translation of a popular Greek proverb goes that actually means to blow our own trumpet. Because tonight's event deals with the latest volume that was published in the framework of our NIA series, Publications of the Netherlands Institute of Athens. Furthermore, the fact that all three editors of this volume are with us tonight to present it gives us the opportunity to meet three dear old friends of the Institute, Margarita Nazou, Meens, and last but not least, Winfred van der Put, who was, what were you? Director of the NIA until 2022. Wonderful to see you again, Winfred. The series Publications of the Netherlands Institute at Athens, as is correct, thus far consists of 9 volumes, whereas the 10th volume is currently in preparation. As you can tell from the small display on the tables in the back of the hall, the series mainly hosts monographies on archaeological and classical subjects, but also proceedings of conferences organized by or in cooperation with the Institute, thus also providing hospitality to themes that fall outside of the traditional scope of the Institute. The first 4 volumes of the series were published with the kind support of the late Han Giebe, publisher in Amsterdam, whereas the 5th volume appeared at Van Gorkum's publishing house in Assen. As of volume 6, the series is in the caring and capable hands of Sidestone Press Publishers in Leiden. Our cooperation with this specific publishing house offers us the opportunity to implement our policy of open online access, to the importance of which Winfred will refer extensively, as I understood, so that basically, and luckily for you, means that I can skip the next 19 pages of the text I prepared. Apart from enabling free open access, Sidestone publishers also offer various publish-on-demand options for those who prefer having a physical copy of our publications on their bookshelves. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I now give the floor to Winfred van der Put, who will further guide us through the program of tonight, which will be concluded by a reception that we have the pleasure of hosting in our Mannequinzaal on the 1st floor. Winfred, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Willem. It's great to be back after quite a few years, and also very happy to be back on this occasion, the publication of this volume. I think it's may well be quite an important one on the field. But Margarita and Anna will go into the details of the contents of the volume. This is a slide of the conference we had with the help of our Danish colleagues at the Danish Institute. That's why they're also big on this slide. And also a big welcome on the Danish director you are. Yes, director. So the motivation of the publication was because we were all involved in finds processing at excavations, but also mainly of surveys. And we all three felt that there was something more to be done with ceramics than just chronological dots on a map, which is, well, what ceramics are usually used for. So we think the use is underexplored and unsystematic as well. And the comparisons between different survey projects are very difficult because everything is different. Nothing is standardized, of course. So the aims of the survey may be totally different. Do we hope to find all Neolithic sites in a particular place, or do we have a cross chronological survey? It's everything is possible. Do we comb the field with 5 meter lines, or do we just visit hopeful sites on hilltops? It's all survey, and it's all collecting material, and the collecting of the material is also very haphazard. Well, not haphazard, but unsystematic. Well, it's systematic in itself, in the project, often, but all projects have different systems. Basically, that's one of the problems you have with comparison. And then there's also the selection of material. What do we keep? What do we take from the field? How do we describe it, etc. These are all not standardized, so comparison is very difficult. And of course, how do you publish this material? It's generally, if you're used to ceramics in museums, well, you would publish 2 shirts of an entire survey at most. Of course, that's not the way to look at ceramics from survey, but it's, well, how do you publish it that is useful to other people? Well, I will go into how the way of publication. Well, Willem already mentioned our earlier series publications of the NIA. So it's really restarted after volume 5. Volume 6 is a new start after about 10 years, I think. And Willem also already mentioned the cooperation with Sidestone publishers, and that is not coincidence. It's because I really wanted to have the publications of the NIA open access, and that was in 2015 already, 2014-15, when I started as a director, was already not entirely new. All the universities, well, I'll come to that later. So Sidestone was started by 2 archaeologists who were frustrated with the way they could or could not publish a thesis. So this quote is very significant. At Sidestone, we believe in open science and in authors retaining full copyright of their work. So it's free to read on their site. It's a cheap PDF you can buy there. It's affordable if you want a printed copy. And the authors retain copyright, so you can distribute the actual publication whenever you want. So really, we're not, well, we do have a few copies of the paper thing, but you can't really buy them here now. But what you can do is take out your phone and scan this QR code, and then you will have the volume on your telephone. So that's, I'll just take a small pause now if you if you want to try it. This is on the website of the NIA itself. Because of hosting, hosting is also costly. Sidestone is asking for 10 or 15 euros, I think, for the PDF from their site. Do you have it? Okay. We also had Pharos, our journal, and that was with Peters. And one of the problems with publishing houses is that Peters is also quite old and established, and they're also, publishing houses are usually quite conservative. So Peters really didn't want open access for a very long time. But eventually, just before I left left office here, I succeeded in having a deal with Peters to have Pharos also immediate open access. So now it's gold open access, as you can see. So also Pharos is freely available on the website of Peters, actually. Yeah. But why do we want open access? Well, it's in the Netherlands. It's quite, and in Europe in general, it's quite an important aim. And the first reason NWO gives, the Foundation for Scientific Research, because it benefits scientists, scientific careers, what other careers, when their work is freely accessible. Research shows that open access publications are read and cited more often and have more impact. Well, that's good for science, that's good for scientists. And in addition, it is important that the results of publicly funded research are as publicly available as possible to everyone. And that's the paid for by the public democratic use of science argument, which is also very important in political discussions about this. And nowadays, it's a requirement for all research publications who are partly or wholly funded by NWO. And also, the universities have this policy. So, since we're a derivative of the universities, it's only logical that we would also embrace open access. And there's also many international efforts to get it. There's a Plan S I just learned about. It's also very important, very international. All research foundations of many countries participate in that. Plan S sounds a bit like Plan 9 from outer space, but it's really something totally different. Of course, this sounds ideal, this open access publication, but there are a few drawbacks. And one of the drawbacks is that publishers want to make money. They can make money from subscriptions, which is the usual, the old-fashioned way, or sale of books. But if they don't have income from subscriptions, then they have an article processing costs. And this means that the author pays to get published. Well, and high-impact publications like Nature also have huge fees. On the website of NWO, they say 10,000 euros for an article in Nature. So there's also predatory journals who really go for the win, for profit, and they have poor articles, weak peer review, and high fees. But you can, well, Vanity Press is just around the corner, I would say. And it also means that universities, through their libraries, have very costly agreements with big publishers as Springer, Elsevier, Wiley, and as I already mentioned, traditional publishing houses are quite reluctant to change into open access. And then there's different levels of openness. The one that I knew first is the moving wall. So the delayed open access. After 5 years, or after 10 years, or after 3 years, the publication, the journal, becomes available for open access. Well, that's not very useful if you want to have, if you want to make an impact for your career, for instance, or so it's not an ideal form. Then there's green open access. That's also a bit older. It's archiving academic repositories, post peer review versions of your article. The problem there is the status. Publication in a peer-reviewed journal, of course, give more status, more credibility, more distribution as well than this type of publication. Then you have the gold open access, and that's immediately available through publishers. There is a fee, an APC fee, and they use different licenses, mostly Creative Commons, so it's free to distribute and use. Well, And this is the level where NIA is, but NIA covers the costs of the APC, and that is kind of close to Diamond open access, and that's immediately available, and they don't have processing fees. And it's then the question is who pays. So that would be ideal. It would be ideal if academics published their own stuff basically, and also and to be fair, we do. All the work is a lot of the work of publishing houses is done by, as you all know, by us. It's the peer review is all cost free. We do it for nothing, and the publishing houses ask a lot of money for it. So it's a bit cut out the middleman is really what we want to be doing. One would expect that this is normal, that we all should strive for open access, but this is an example of our colleague institute in Florence. They were very, very proud to have their latest publication with Brill, which is of course one of the largest, oldest publishing houses of scientific texts. But it will cost you 200 euros, and there is a digital version, but it's also 200 euros. And Rome, our big brother in Rome, so to say, our big sister institute, has this for 60 euros, which is slightly more reasonably priced. But I couldn't find a PDF version, so I couldn't find an online version of it. So it's far from open access. On the other hand, through Margarita, I know that the National Documentation Center, which combines many research institutes in Greece, or represents many research institutes in Greece, does have a very active open access publication policy. About 80 journals are covered by this. So that is really very, very good, I think. And with this, I will want to close the whole presentation of open access and why we chose to publish it this way. Now, a small round what we actually did in survey. Well, I participated in survey for the first time in the Laconia survey of the BSA in 1985. Quite life ago. I went to Boeotia in 2006 with John Bincliffe, to Malta with our doctor and the University of Ghent, who also did a survey on the hill of Torikos. And I also participated in a resurvey in Halos. And the photo you see is a reference collection I made together with some colleagues with the material in Malta. I think reference collections, I don't think we say much about it in this volume. We do? No. A bit, okay. Well, I think this is also a very important aspect of a survey, because you can revisit the actual material. So it's well. So thank you for your attention for this part. I will now give the word to Anna, who will say what she has done.
So, welcome everybody. As Winfred stated, the idea for the conference and for the book developed from our own experiences with survey pottery. So I will tell you a bit about my experiences with survey pottery. So I started working with ceramics as a student in 2010 at the Boeotia Survey Project, and I kept doing so until the present day, actually. And I was actually very lucky to start there for two reasons. The first reason is the large and enthusiastic multi-period team of pottery specialists that we have there. And the second is the condition and the abundance of the ceramic material that is found in Boeotia. So one of the difficulties with working with survey pottery, of course, is that there is no stratigraphical information to guide you when working with the ceramics. So the material that comes from the surface can come from any period, from the Neolithic up to the present day. So that is why it's important to have pottery specialists for different periods in the team, because they can identify the sherds from their respective periods and discuss the groups of less easily identifiable material. And the latter are often the plain and the coarse wares, for which we are simply in dire need of more published and dated excavation material. And I've learned a great deal from the pottery team in Boeotia. So it was only when I started working elsewhere that I realized how rare the Boeotian survey samples were. They are in an excellent condition because they were collected just after the material was deplowed. It is in a much better state than most survey material, which was on the surface for a much longer time, and even than a lot of excavation material, in fact. So, what also helps is that the Boeotian pottery production was of high quality, making the sherds more durable. And moreover, there is an abundance of material from the surface. There are places where there is hardly any soil between the sherds. So, in fact, the material from the urban sites that were surveyed, Tanagra, Thespiae, Hietos, and Koronaia, is so much, even though the samples are selective, that it brings up questions like how many years are we willing to study material, and can we find funding for the study of it, and does more material yield more interesting results? So I also worked in the Plaga survey and the Strategie surface survey project in Acarnania, and in the Halos archaeological survey project in Magnesia and Thessaly. And these projects provide smaller pottery samples, which is partly because the sampling was more strict and the sherds are more worn. And the smaller samples provide a challenge in the interpretation, because how does one interpret a site that is represented by 8 sherds of all different periods? At the same time, the local pottery manufacturing traditions in these regions are less well understood, making it more difficult to correctly classify and identify the material. What does help, however, in the case of the Halos survey material, is that there is good reference material for the Hellenistic period from the excavations in the town of New Halos, and now there is also archaic and classical material from the excavations that were undertaken in Old Halos or Margula Plataniotici. Then, lastly, I also worked in Naxos, Keros, and Kato Koufounisi, which was another experience again, because in most projects the bulk of material would be classical to Roman. So there would be a lot of material for me to deal with because I work mostly with material between the Archaic and Hellenistic period. Yet here there is a lot of prehistoric material and also quite some Roman, leaving the Archaic Hellenistic sherds a small minority. And this poses questions for the interpretation. So are such low densities high enough to speak of sites? And can we do a functional analysis to say if it was a settlement or maybe a representation of another activity? So while I was working on all these different projects with all these different survey materials, there are a few main issues or challenges that I encountered, which is, for example, how do we increase diagnosticity among the plain and the coarse wares? There is a tendency to date by association, but that's very dangerous, and we simply need more reference material from excavated contexts. Also, another question that was in my mind is the selectivity of the samples. Is that hindering our conclusions? Or is it helping with reducing the amount of material to a workable amount for pottery specialists? And if so, who should be doing the selection? Should it be done in the field or in the pottery storeroom? Then there is the other question of how to interpret multi-period sites, as I mentioned before, especially the ones with a small amount of material from various periods. Then there's the question, how can we distinguish site functionality, which is what my chapter is about, which I will tell a bit more about later. And lately, as Winfred already touched upon, there is the question, how do we publish and present large numbers of sherds as found in surveys? It is impossible to photograph or to draw each sherd, so it makes sense to put all the information in a database. But then again, how do we publish a database? It's not very useful to have a printed database in a publication. But on the other hand, lists and numbers are important because they provide the basis for our interpretations. So perhaps we should make the databases from archaeological surveys publicly accessible in a durable digital form on the web. And in fact, many of these issues that came up while working with the survey material are also very relevant for excavated ceramics. And with that, I will give the floor to Margarita, who will tell us a bit more about her experiences with survey pottery.
Thank you, Anna. I will continue a bit about my personal experience with survey pottery, and then Anna and I will present the chapters of the book. So my first survey pottery study experience, which was in many ways critical in order for me to get into the field of survey pottery studies, was a Knossos urban landscape project. It was in the summer of 2006, so almost 20 years ago, and I had just started my PhD study. My supervisor, Professor Todd Whitelew, was already well into the study process of the overwhelming amounts of pottery from his project and needed students to go through the material and sort it into broad chronological periods so that they could be studied by experts in the field at the second stage. I remember I liked the idea of sorting, which forced me to develop specific criteria for classification. Though I also remember my frustration when Todd checked my work and changed places to things. This seemed like a job that could drive someone insane if they did not have a certain confidence and/or experience with material. I soon realized that uncertainties were far more interesting than certainties. The debates on when sherds were dated, whether they were prehistoric or classical cooking wares, became more intense in the next project I participated in, the Thorikos Survey Project, when we also had to go through huge amounts of material over several study campaigns. By then, I had already specialized in prehistoric pottery from Thorikos, and before I joined the survey team, Winfred had already sent me pictures of sherds that looked like classical cooking ware in their fabric, but they had a different firing and surface treatment than what was expected from classical cooking wares. I increasingly became more confident in identifying prehistoric fabrics and had to explain my criteria to the two project directors, Roald Docter and Floris van den Einde, who were classical archaeologists. I have to say at this point that all these sherds are very worn, so you can get into huge debates on when something is dated, and usually specialists want to claim the sherds for their period, so it can get very intense. Uh, so we were able at Thorikos to identify a significant prehistoric presence over the Velaturi Hill and published our results in preliminary reports. So I sort of convinced them. But it was only when I joined the CARS, MAP, and BEARS projects that I felt matured in my skill and expertise. Having completed my PhD in prehistoric pottery, I was able to engage more actively in interpretations of the material beyond typology and chronology. And especially in MAP and BEARS, my collaborators emphasized the value of pottery in understanding and reconstructing site function. We could then move from the site to the regional level and create palimpsests of human activity, looking at issues like settlement, burial, architecture, agriculture, and trade. During my participation in all these projects as a prehistoric pottery specialist, I engaged in discussions on how and why we record and interpret the pottery. After Winfred asked me to co-organize the conference, I became enthusiastic about exploring the specific issues we encountered during our studies and whether we can actually find common ground even though we may be asking different questions in each project. So overall, I think the conference and the resulting publication offered us pottery specialists a platform to come out of our very specific expertise caves, so to speak, and forced us to exchange views on methodologies, research questions, and comparison of our results. Each project is, of course, unique, and its logistics are often dictated by its budget and specific research agendas. However, I have found that luck plays a role as well, especially in assembling the project's participants and specialists. Word of mouth and friendships must not be underestimated. And one tends to collaborate with the same people over the years, especially because the world of archaeology is, after all, quite small. So, moving on to the themes addressed in the volume. Sherds that are collected in archaeological field surveys, as opposed to those found in excavation, present the archaeologist with a unique opportunity. It is possible to examine material from different find locations and thereby study a palimpsest of an entire ancient landscape. Simultaneously, it offers the opportunity to understand how this landscape developed through time, as most surveys encounter sherds from a multitude of periods. Survey ceramics thus enable addressing a different set of questions than those asked in excavations. That survey ceramics are a valuable source of information is emphasized in the various approaches to surface ceramics in this book. But three themes run as a red thread through the contribution in this volume. First of all, transparency in ceramic collecting, processing, and interpretation. Secondly, improving diagnosticity. And thirdly, expanding the interpretive potential of survey ceramics. So we will see in the next part of the presentation how the authors, all the authors, try to solve the issues that they encountered. And we specifically, when we organized the conference, we asked them to focus on their methodology. That's what we wanted to discuss. So the first theme, the transparency in ceramic collecting, processing, and interpretation. So in survey archaeology, surface ceramics provide the basis for understanding human activity in a landscape. And sherds can serve as convenient chronological markers for the archaeological sites discovered in field projects. However, how this pottery is collected and studied determines the possibilities for using the sherds as a source material. Not only the collection practices, but also the process and practicalities of ceramic analysis are rarely made explicit, even though the archaeological interpretations of human activity in the landscape strongly rely on it. Most of the contributions in this volume provide an insight in collection, processing, and interpretation practices in a specific survey project. And we hope this transparency is inspiring and contributes to a better understanding of surface ceramics as a basis for historical interpretations. How the collection strategy shapes the datasets is demonstrated by Stacey, who compares and contrasts data from two Greek surveys, the Alos Archaeological Survey Project and the Boeotia Survey, in Chapter 10. The differences between the datasets in terms of diagnosticity reveal different approaches in the collection strategy. Looking at the proportions of feature sherds and percentages of diagnostic sherds, Stacey also raises the possibility that the amount of material available on the surface affects the selectivity or inclusivity of a sherd collection. Moreover, we should be aware that some of the patterns that occur in survey datasets may in fact be the result of the processing and classification of ceramics rather than historical realities. This realization underlines the importance of describing the process of collecting and processing ceramics. De Haas and al. Describe the evolution of the collection strategy used in the Pontine Region project in Italy, and assess in what ways highly intensive sampling methods contribute to a better understanding of an archaeological site. The more intensive approaches are costly in terms of time and storage, so they try to find a good balance. They also stress the importance of describing the sampling methods, because this is essential for integrating and comparing survey data on a regional level. In Chapter 9, Wiersma also discusses the effects of different sampling methods, in particular how these affect our understanding of prehistoric settlements. She compares total and selective samples taken in the course of the Agios Vasilios survey project on the Peloponnese. It appears that total sampling is more effective for detecting early and to some extent middle Helladic and early Mycenaean material on the surface, and that a better spatial resolution is obtained by using total collection, which eases the integration of the pottery data with the results of the geophysical research. However, the area for total collection is reduced in order to keep the number of finds manageable. The fifth chapter, by myself, Murphy, Abel, Lafayette, Hogue, and Walrod, is particularly devoted to describing the pottery processing, which is organized by taking all practical issues into account: space, time, and workforce. It emphasizes the contribution of students and less skilled participants whose role should not be underestimated. On the contrary, the study of survey pottery can provide great learning opportunities. Traynor and Stone in Chapter 11 offer an insight into the processing of shared material collected at the urban sites of Sicyon and Knossos. The methodology at Sicyon is based on index sherds, which are recognized by specialists because they bear resemblance to dated sherds from other excavated contexts, in combination with a detailed fabric analysis. In Knossos, a pre-sorting of material according to broad chronological groups was the starting point, as I told you earlier, from which further refinements were added by specialists, for example, specific fabrics, in a project database. Both pottery datasets reveal information about the functionality of specific areas in the city in terms of pottery production and commerce, yet it is difficult to identify households and neighborhoods. The third chapter, by Garcia Sanchez, discusses how we can move from the pottery data produced by specialists to archaeological interpretations. Usually, interpretations are based on maps and statistics, yet he proposes a method called Stadion, which incorporates both in a visual way. The transparent method, which is mainly geared towards detecting functional differences, enables comparison of survey results and allows integration with other archaeological data, for example, the data obtained by remote sensing techniques. So Anna will now continue and present to you the second theme, or red thread. So I give the floor to you.
So the second theme or red thread that runs through the book is improving diagnosticity. So unfortunately, the preservation of survey ceramics is usually worse than excavated material, though the preservation of excavated pottery may also vary depending on the context. So post-depositional processes like ploughing, weathering, and erosion can leave very fragmented and badly degraded sherds for the ceramologist to study, sometimes jokingly called dog food because of its resemblance in color, usually a shade of brown, and a lack of shape. So the poor preservation thus represents the pottery specialist with a challenging material, where it is not straightforward to identify the fabric, the shape, and decoration, arguably free of the most important characteristics of a shirt. Generally, after one becomes familiar with the types and variations of broken pottery, quite a number of shirts can be positively identified in terms of shape, decoration, fabric, and/or chronology. Yet the ceramologist is left with a remainder of less diagnostic material. The latter group of finds consume much study time and storage space, usually offering only a limited amount of information in return. For these reasons, such material is often left in the field, or when it is studied, these finds are left out of the final publication. Though in most landscapes, Selective collection is necessary because of the density of ceramic finds on the surface. Selection criteria are rarely made explicit. Moreover, not including the less diagnostic material in the publication creates a skewed image of the pottery types presented in the collected samples, and which sherds are considered diagnostic or undiagnostic varies between sermologists, but also depends on the research questions. So the present volume demonstrates that the study of less diagnostic material in fact contributes to a better understanding of human activity in the landscape, as it showcases different approaches to this kind of pottery. So the ceramic methodology that Winter Jacobsen proposes in Chapter 2 is geared towards identifying functional groups in the survey material. She proposes a use typology, which is a hierarchical classification system based on various pottery characteristics. This system provides a way to include plain body sherds as well. Recording the wall thickness allows the inclusion of these otherwise non-diagnostic sherds in the functional spectrum, thereby adding to our understanding of activity differentiation at the site and regional level and aiding the identification of land use patterns. The recording of the thickness of body sherds, by the way, is also undertaken by the pottery specialists working on kerels. See Chapter 7, which is by my Amsterdam colleagues Krijnenwagen and Hilditch. So the team working in the plain of Mazi, on the border between Attica and Boeotia, take the fabric of the non-diagnostic sherds into account, allowing them to establish the functional character and chronological range of these sherds, which is described in the third chapter, which is by Cloak, Nodel, Vachar, and Papangeli, who we are very happy to have here with us today. There appears to be a large degree of continuity in the use of specific regional fabrics, resulting in the broad date ranges for much of this material. This honesty is characteristic of the team's approach to the finds processing. By assigning start and end dates to each sherd and subsequently visualizing these categories on a map, nuances are added to the local settlement history, and the differential visibility or diagnosticity is partly remedied. Some of the less visible periods are most likely hidden among the plain and the coarsewares. So a specific group of material, which is often regarded as largely undiagnostic, is impasto pottery, which is found in Italy. In Chapter 6, Ippolito and Atema describe how they succeeded in dating this pottery, which amounts to an important part of the finds from the survey in the Raganello Valley in Calabria. By considering a variety of survey sherd characteristics and a detailed comparison with excavated impasto shapes, Ippolito was able to add chronological nuance to the interpretation of impasto sites and the landscape in which they occur. In the seventh chapter, which is by Krijnenwagen and Hilditch, the pottery specialists working on material from the Keros Island Survey project describe how they pay special attention to the recording of the technological traits of the ceramic material, diagnostic and non-diagnostic alike. The combination of technological traits is recorded in the diagnostics and belonging. Oh, sorry, I misread. They pay special attention to the recording of the technological traits of the ceramic material, of the diagnostic and the non-diagnostic material. The combination of technological traits recorded in the diagnostics and belonging to various period groups are then used as a chronological marker for the previously non-diagnostic material, thereby providing further basis for tracing the extent and intensity of human activity on this cycladic island. So we've come to the third and the last theme, which is addressed in the book, which is expanding the interpretive potential for survey ceramics. So survey ceramics are, as Winfred already remarked, convenient chronological markers for the archaeological sites discovered in field projects. However, their potential is not limited to providing the building stones for the creation of a chronological framework. Rather than regarding the sherds as dating tools, several contributors to this book highlight how Sherds can contribute to a better understanding of past peoples, settlements, and activities. For example, the survey datasets help us understand the nature and the functions of archaeological sites and can trace the networks in which the sites operate. So, of course, it's important to know when a site was in use, but it's equally important to know what a site represents. And all too often it is assumed that sites are settlements, but site function is worth a second thought. So my own contribution, chapter 13, emphasizes that not all sites are settlements and reminds us to consider the possibility of burial sites. Such sites may be identified on the presence of grave infrastructure or bones, yet it is also possible to identify ceramic scatters as burial sites if we take a detailed look at the contents of the assemblage and compare it with pottery assemblages from excavated cemeteries. The surface sherds thus enable establishing site function, which in turn can help us understand the settlement pattern. So my colleagues from the Boeotia project, Peters, Bess and Poblome in chapter 12, were curious to see if the survey samples from an extramural part of the city of Tanagra in Boeotia reveal information about the functions this specific area once had. By applying statistical analysis in a very nuanced way, they have been able to detect functional differences between the intramural and the extramural areas, and the increased presence of lamps and finewares in the extramural area suggests that this area functioned as a cemetery. So the chapters by Peters, Bess and Poblome and by myself are not the only ones trying to expand the interpretive potential of survey ceramics, and this is also a recurring theme in many of the other contributions to the book. But I think it's now more or less time to conclude, so I suggest that if you want to know more about this, to take a look at the book, which you can read online for free, as already mentioned, but you can also order it as an ebook or a hard copy on the website of the publisher Sidestone. And with that, we've come to the end of this
So, so we come to the part.
Otherwise, the people online.
Yeah.
Well, people online can't hear me with this microphone. So now we've come to the part where we can answer all kinds of questions about everything concerning field survey and publishing. So, do you have any questions or points for discussion? Otherwise, we just have an early drink.
People online can ask questions. So okay. My friend Stella Katsarou is at the audience. So we will just start discussing this is all that, right? So she told me basically that, all these methods are really nice, but all the early archaeologists, they just walked in the fields and they described what they saw. And, then I thought to myself, oh, how processual are we? I think the early archaeologists were really much more, post-processual in the sense that they described exactly what they saw and their experiences. But I think, having a processual volume about how to study survey pottery is something really useful. So I'm very happy that we actually managed to publish this, and also very happy that I worked with Winfred and Anna. We had really lots of fun, I would say. Even though, sometimes the papers were very technical. So we really tried to, use very simple language. Also, okay, with permission of the authors, to change it a bit so that students also can understand. So that's what I wanted to say. Is there a question?
I have a question.
Tienes que tapar tu micrófono.
If I have to.
The mic, sorry.
thank you all for your very interesting lecture. I'm not sure that I understood everything, but I did my best. But what I'm wondering about is how is the time divided between field work and research? I mean, is there much more field work? Is there much more research? How is the time divided? Is it clear what I'm?
Yes, I think we understand. You want to answer? Or? Okay, so usually, the first stage is people go out in the field and they collect the pottery. And this can take quite a while, because there's not enough money to do it all in one go or enough space. So people usually do it in several field campaigns. And then the specialists come in and they study the pottery. And this can be even more time consuming. It can take years, because not all specialists are available at the same time, and it's also it needs coordination. So actually, I think being a survey director is really a very difficult job, uh, because you have to coordinate. It's a really big team. It's the field workers and then the people who are in charge of recording the data sheets for the field, and then you have to invite the specialists to have like preliminary assessments and maybe do a selection, and then you go back to it. So it's a very dynamic process.
So is it direct to arranges everything?
Of course, yeah. And so I
That
think
makes already much more.
yes.
You don't have to roam around the whole by yourself trying to complete this.
I think that's what the early researchers did,
Yeah,
and
that's what it feels
that was
like.
very useful.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think now most projects have a whole team of people, and and actually to tie it all together, it needs a very good coordinator. So that's the job of that.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you.
Yes.
If I may add something also, what I've experienced is that often the collection of the material in the field and the study of the material is done in separate campaigns even sometimes, which
In separate groups.
in separate groups. Also, it's done by different people indeed, because often the field survey often involves students, for example, and the pottery specialists, they are brought in only later when the material is already there, when it's washed, when it's all bagged, stored. But I think the nice thing that happened in the Beotia survey project where I worked is that the study of the finds by the pottery specialists was undertaken at the same time when they were collecting still. So the presence of these pottery specialists would also help in determining, for example, the selection criteria for the people in the field. Because, well, who is doing this? If they are selecting samples, who is doing the selection? And then the input from the sermologists, I think, is very valuable because they can tell a little bit like, okay, maybe these things are not so helpful because they are not particularly diagnostic at the moment, because I think it's always useful to include a small sample so that maybe later when you identify a specific type of pottery, you can go back to the samples. But I think the presence of pottery specialists at the time the fieldwork is undertaken, I think is valuable, and I think well, projects I think could benefit from doing that a lot.
Just one more addition, that the amounts of finds you have during a survey are so gigantic that pottery specialists and pottery persons can't really keep up what comes in. So and during a survey, most of the man hours are on the field, basically, are collecting. It's just a small clarification.
Vladimir Stacy asks, do you think it is possible to phrase some general guidelines that could vary from almost every project and may help comparability?
So he said, is it possible to have some general guidelines so that, like protocols, I think because each survey is different, then the methodology can change according to the research questions. And as we said, this is a very dynamic process. When specialists come in, they give feedback, and then maybe we go back to the sites. But I think that's why we wanted to have this book. And it's a good question because I think we need to talk to each other, like people, the directors and the specialists from different projects, in order to learn. Because I think we all learn as we grow. So it's important. Actually, that was really fun at the conference because we said, "Oh, so you do that." I think at the conference at the time, I wasn't really part of the map and the bears project. So that's when Christina Pinker Jefferson presented the functional typology. I was like, we should do that. And then, we changed a little bit also on care to include functions. So I think the dialogues are important. I don't want to give very strict guidelines and protocols, but I think the book itself does point to transparency and how things should be recorded, how we should be explicit about what we are doing. So I think the book is a good, let's say, starting point. So I don't know.
No.
If no one has another question, we don't have, we just people here congratulate the three of you. Okay. Thank you for being with us tonight, and we want to invite you to go upstairs for a reception.
And thank you for all
Thank you
this.
for organizing such a
Thank you.
Yes.